Well, hello everybody. It is Train Tuesday, and I'm your host James. And Janik is away on assignment because you guys keep buying so much Athearn stuff. He's busy building more Athearn stuff for you, along with Matt. But don't worry, we're going to see Matt again the end of the month, and we're going to see Janik probably next Tuesday. So don't fear. And I got a real good treat for you today. As we were saying before. We're going to be showing you some Roundhouse products. It's that time of year to think about a couple of different things. Maybe you've got someone that you want to get into model railroading, or maybe you want to take a trip down memory lane, if you will. And that's kind of what we're going to do today. We're going to kind of take a trip down memory lane. So depending on how long you've been into the hobby, this could be a lot of memories could come back. And if you're new to the hobby, welcome aboard. I think we're going to have something very special today that I think you will enjoy. So what we're going to do is in a little bit, we'll start talking about the new Roundhouse products that we're going to be showcasing this month. Once again, I want to say thanks for everybody that's on board. I see your comments out there. Thanks for showing up. And we will definitely try to answer your questions as we go on. I see some questions popping up already, and I appreciate that. So we will talk about those things a little bit later, but for right now, we've got some special stuff going on. And I thought about the Athearn F units, and I don't know if you knew about this or not, but the Athearn F units have been around since the 1950s. And I had one when I was young. In fact, I've got it with me here today. And my dad had one too, back probably in the early 60s. So it's kind of neat how it's become a family hobby, and someone that has a lot of knowledge on model trains from the past is Tony Cook. So I want to bring on Tony here and welcome him aboard.
Hey,
James. Tony, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. You know, I was just telling the audience, these F units kind of bring back a flood of memories. I know I've got one from when I was a kid. My dad's got one. In fact, I still have my dad's F unit. These have been around a long time.
I would venture to say that the Globe Athearn F unit, which I think it's 1954, is its introduction. Out of all the models that Athearn's produced over the years, that has to be one of the ones that's been run the most. And again, who has been in HO modeling that would have avoided not having that? I mean, it's almost like the prototype roads where, okay, name me a road that didn't own an F unit, and you really get down to maybe Illinois Central, Norfolk and Western, but everybody had F units. And the Athearn F unit is, yeah, if that's not your first, it has to be one of the models you got pretty early on. But it went through a lot of changes, and there's a lot of neat stuff about it. And you guys are bringing it back in again, and it's now in the Roundhouse offering, which I can't remember if it's done that before or not. Because I always tend to pick them out and buy them in the AB sets or other things because it is such a classic that it's like, oh, that's cool, I got to have one. And I can't remember now if I have a Roundhouse boxed one, if this is its first time or not. But then I know you're doing some other changes too, that I think the last couple shows you'd mentioned that changes were coming and maybe not all finalized yet.
They really are. There's a lot of changes that we're bringing to this current Athearn locomotive. And if we go to the Wayback Machine, back to the 1950s, I had one, not that I'm that old, but I inherited it from my dad. I don't know about you. You don't seem that much difference in age than myself, but we've seen the rubber band drive Athearn locomotives, the RDCs and the F units. And now we've perfected yet another drivetrain on this locomotive. We're going to also offer it with LED lighting. That's the first time it's ever been offered. And we're also going to offer it as DCC ready for the 21 plug board. So, you know, even beginners are realizing the dynamics that they can do with DCC. DCC is no longer just kind of a fringe thing of model railroading. It really is almost more common now than DC.
Oh, I would agree.
Yeah. We want to bring in. Yeah, definitely. The other thing too that Janik reminded me this morning is, you remember how we used to have the contact metal plates inside the F units and the RDCs. And I mean that worked really well. It's something that's probably been in that locomotive for a good solid 30 years. But we've changed that up as well. We've kind of gone to something a little bit more modern. We've got 2 wires per truck, so a little bit more flexible, a little bit easier, and so definitely some new stuff. I figured what we could do, Tony, is first I'll show you some of the new offered F units that we're going to be coming out with, and let's get back in the Wayback Machine and see where the roots of the F unit came from. How's that sound?
Awesome. Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and get our latest sheet up. So here we are. And, you can't have a quintessential locomotive without having quintessential paint schemes. And I think the guys, Janik and Matt, picked out some great paint schemes here.
Oh, absolute classics. I mean, the Santa Fe red and silver, without question, I think that's number one on anybody's list. But boy, that SP Daylight is always, I remember having an AB set of Athearns as those I got as a kid in the 70s. And yeah, both those are awesome. The Northwestern, I think, is new. I don't know that that's been done for at least in the Horizon era of assembled, and I'm pretty sure not before. But yeah, that Northwestern scheme I thought was interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now that you mention it, I mean, of course, the Santa Fe war bonnet, that for whatever reason, the F units and any of those cowl units, they just wore that paint scheme really well. But, I agree with you, too. That Southern Pacific Daylighter is just stunning. And once again, that car body just really shows that paint scheme really well. And then, as you said, the Chicago Northwestern, yeah, you know what? I don't think, at least that would be about 2004. I don't remember that. Now, that doesn't mean anything, but I don't remember that particular paint scheme offered before with the F unit.
I don't either, and it's a repaint. It's not like the executive paint scheme that the units wore, but it's certainly not an older. I would guess that's like 1970s, very late 60s, kind of a solid repaint. Year I would guess for that, but yeah, I think that's the first time.
I would think so. Yeah, I think you're right on that. So. Yeah, you've got West Coast represented with some classic paint schemes. You've got the Midwest with a simplified paint scheme. I can't forget our friends in the frozen tundra either. And coming from New England, I don't remember this particular locomotive, but I remember this paint scheme, the multi-mark CP rail. Yeah. Really cool paint scheme. Some guys jokingly called it the Pac-Man logo too, because that was popular about the same time as that video game. But I don't think we've offered the CP rail in this paint scheme on the F unit before either.
No, I don't remember that being having been in the last, as I say, like 20 years or so for the Horizon era for those. And yeah, that is one of the quintessential. It comes out, I guess, in the late 60s as Canadian Pacific rebrands itself CP Rail. And yeah, the multi-mark or the Pac-Man was, I think it's New York design firm Lippincott and Margulies created like that. They created the BN, the Great Northern Blue Sky, the Amtrak Pointless Arrow. So all those quote unquote 60s modern looks generally came out of that agency in New York. And that's certainly one of their classics, I think, is this CP Rail look.
Yeah, definitely. That I remember seeing a lot of that paint scheme on locomotives in Vermont and northern New Hampshire way back when, and it's cool to see that. I always like the barricade stripes on the front of the locomotives, and again, the F unit wears that really well. And so I think we've got everybody there, but I never want to forget the South. And the South had some great railroads. And here's one of the, in my opinion, one of the prettiest paint schemes ever to adorn one of these F units. The Southern.
I would agree. Yeah, it takes those General Motors like styling cues where the comes up, wraps around the number boards, and goes back. You can see a lot of elements that cross in all of these different paint schemes. And if you do some looking around on the internet, it's fun to see some of the mock-ups and other things that the GM guys would do for different railroads that never came to be, yet you'll see the same elements of, oh, look, there's that sweeping curve up off the nose and back that ends up on 2 or 3 other schemes. And this is, again, one of those kind of, one of their templates, but with the Southern, was it the white is actually what they call it, imitation aluminum, I think.
I believe you're right. I'm sure some Southern fans out there will
check
tell
us
us
on
if
it,
we're
yeah.
correct or not.
And then, of course, the green goes, you've got the freight units had the darker color, and then the Fs and Es had this lighter green. But, you know, classic stuff there. And Southern, like the CP Rail, operates F units into the 70s because, of course, Amtrak doesn't get the Crescent till 79, and CP Rail is running passenger trains until VIA's 77 or 78. So, yeah, both of these would have options way into the 70s.
Yeah, this is a good. I'm always amazed, you know, with what the guys come up with as far as what's a good cross section. I think, you know, with the 5 different versions here, they got a pretty good cross section. And once again, these are offered as a single F7A, or you can also get them in an A/B set. So, man, you can make a really nice setup with this. And you know, I've talked to some dealers out there too, and the reason why the F unit I think endures so well is because it has been a first HO scale locomotive for somebody, and it's a great locomotive because it has a lot of the same features as some of the ready to runs and Genesis. It's a great running locomotive. It's a great puller. I mean, we know how heavy these guys are. They've got some weight to them, and yet they're above a toy train, you know, like you'd see at a department store toy train set, but they don't break the bank either. They're a good mix of economy and beginner kind locomotive. They don't have a lot of fragile details to break off or anything of that nature.
No, I mean, it truly, and that's, I think, why it's endured for, what is it now, going on 75 years? Is because you know, it is such a classic and is a great starter locomotive that, you know, as I say, I still find myself when these announcements come out like, oh, look at that road name, I'll need to have that set. And it's like, you know, really, the old Athearn F unit? It's like, oh yeah, I got to have one of those. You know?
It really is amazing that the enduring qualities of that locomotive. It seems to be a great mix of, you know, contours and lines of the actual locomotive itself, combined with, I think, a little bit of nostalgia. You know, like you said, it's a model that's been around since the 50s. It was a locomotive that had its roots in the 30s and slowly progressed through the 40s and into the 50s, and you kind of had that golden era of rail transportation in the 40s and 50s with the streamliners and things of that nature. And I think it touches on nostalgia, and I think we all get like to have some nostalgia sometimes. And even if, you know, I know myself, I mean, my HO scale switching layout is going to be predominantly Genesis units, but yeah, I'm still going to pick up probably the CP rail. I'm going to probably stay true to my roots, and I'll get me a CP rail, don't you know?
Hey, yeah, sounds good. You know, the thing about that F unit, when you think about it, it's an F7, and when it comes out in 54, that's what EMD's making, because the 9 series is 56, so the F9 would have come out right after. And I think because, as you say, you know, I'm 50, I'll be 55 next year. You know, we've always had these, and you tend to think of them as, well, it's an F unit, and that's an old prototype. But in actuality, when it came out, it would be the equivalent of like a Gevo or a 70 Ace, that an F7 was what EMD was cranking out in those days. So it's, you know, it is endured from the time it was a new release, when it was a new prototype on North American rails, all the way till now. But it's changed a lot. I think you have some pictures, I think, and then I've got some models that I can show, because I know this surprises some folks at times, because again, it's a model we've had around forever. So you think, well, it's the same as it always was. But if you're not really familiar with it, you'll be amazed at the changes, the little subtle changes that did happen over the years.
Yeah, let's see. You had sent me some really cool ads. I'm going to find those real quick. And
And
let
I know
me.
we said it was a globe, and while you're looking for those, globe is not just the F unit. Here's a globe catalog that shows, what they had before, and they were based in Milwaukee. It was two guys in Milwaukee that started Globe, and if you bought kits back in the time, this is like the Globe 40-foot boxcar, and it was the typical wood, metal sides, not just a screwdriver to put it together. Lots of work. And you can see the old loop and hook coupler there. But this was the instruction sheet you got with the Globe boxcar. And then here's an example of an early Globe freight car kit. I think this is a stock car, and it's kind of semi-built, but it'll give a good idea to folks. And it's, wood bottom. The sides are metal. This is, I get lined up to the camera here well. Mopac stock car. And, it seems very crude today, but whether it was, Roundhouse, Varney, Ulrich, whoever, this was kind of state of the art for the early 1950s ahead of plastic. And the thing that was so really landmark about the Globe F unit was the fact that, it basically helps introduce plastic models. This is a Globe box from their early stuff, the F unit. And one of the things with the F unit I thought was interesting when they first came out, it's not molded in that color, but this gold A and B set was a very typical thing to find. And even the base that goes in, it's all plastic. Remember, there was no drive for these. They had plastic trucks. The drive market explodes after this comes out, before Athearn introduces its drive, with like Olympic and Hobbytown and various people coming up with drives to power the Globe Athearn F unit when it was brand new. And there we go. There's an early shot. And this is not long after. You'll notice there it says Globe, an Athearn quality product. So it was Globe for a couple of years, and then I think that's about, I see the date there. That's December 1954's Railroad Model Craftsman ad, and that's about the time it's out for a handful of months as the Globe, and then it switches over to Globe by Athearn, and then is just, Athearn's F unit at that point. But there's its first, and it did have a gear mechanism. Athearn got one for it pretty quickly, but the non-powered all plastic were around for a while. And that one I see has got the two headlights, which the earlier ones, there were single headlights on that first one, the first go around for it, and the number boards were not molded onto the F unit. There were like 3 points that those boards sat on, and the air horns on the roof were actually multi-pieces that snapped together. So
I think you sent me I'm going to scroll through and see. I thought, there it is.
There it is. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great picture.
And see, that's marked as Globe, and that's all plastic. And notice those bulkheads that went on the inside of it. I think that's curious. You can even see a door on the front one to go back into the engine compartment. That went away fairly quickly. But you'll see the two number boards up front, and they came black. You see it says paint them yellow. The unit itself, for this UP, it's molded in a yellow color. You painted the gray, which would be the underframe, the trucks, the pilot, the skirting, the stirrup steps, and the roof. And then you see paint red stripe along top of grills and over roof. So the only thing stamped on it, the example I have that was on HO Collector, and I think we have a picture of it there, the 1468 and Union Pacific and the F for front are stamped in red, tampoed. But then the UP on the nose is there we go. The UP on the nose is the decal. And also that has a bit of a jewel or something set into its headlight. Believe it or not, there was no working headlight. That did not go it didn't go all the way through. So if you wanted the headlight to work, you would have had to have drilled that out. And no glass, plastic for the portholes or the cab at all. But that example there, we did that with the Athearn timeline of diesels that we did a couple years ago in HO Collector Quarterly. And that's pretty much a stock model that, has got the painted gray was added to it. And the guy, it looks like he used decal, but because it's molded plastic, the decal naturally won't hold because there's no paint or surface for it. So those poor stickers, I had to do a lot of work to keep them on just to get a picture of them. But again, it's so much different than the F unit we know today. Between those number boards got molded on, you got dual headlights later that actually worked, that went all the way through. The air horn, the single bugles got turned into actual molded pieces rather than the multi-part piece. So again, it's a lot different. And the back end of the model, it had dummy couplers, and I think we can show it there.
Let's see. Let me remove that, and I'm going to.
Yeah. That this back end had like a molded piece underneath that held the coupler was in place. So a little bit different coupler pocket. So again, a lot of, when you start looking at these now, on eBay and other things, you'll start, specking some of these things and seeing like, oh, there's an older version of this or that. So it did go through quite a few changes. And then there's a lot of anomaly type odd releases. The one I haven't done a story on it yet, I don't think anywhere, but the Hobo F unit. Have you seen it before? It's kind of, I consider it to be like, it was battery powered. Let me find I've got the instruction sheet here. It was battery powered. See, you put like a big C or something battery here in the center, made in Japan, and you just turned it on, and it basically was a unit that ran around your layout that you almost would have to try to avoid with your other train. But it gave you the amazing ability to run two trains at once. How great is that? And it was not an Athearn product. It's made by Pacemaker, but they used Athearn shells, which several people did. Like the early Penline F units were Athearn, and they also used Penline used the Athearn Jeep 7. So you'll find that Athearn supplied parts for folks, and that Hobo is one of and it comes in a handful of road names, and that's a fun piece to pick up. I've never put batteries in this one to see if it would actually do anything, but there's so many odd, because Athearn was so big and did things for so many people that there's curiosities out there like that to go looking for.
That's funny. You mentioned the Penline, and my dad's F unit, the chassis says Penline, and we'll show that a little bit later. But I want to get back to some of these cool pictures that you sent. This one here, really, that is a really cool find. I've not seen one of those at the many train shows that I've been to, and I'm going to have to keep my eyes open next time for that.
The box I think is so cool, with the train flying around the earth and everything. That's awesome. Yeah.
I think you've got this one's this is a cool ad. Now this ad is from, I can't quite make out the date. Can you tell me?
That's January of '65. And
okay,
is in the early 60s after the rubber band. There's a rubber band drive, there's which they called high F, and then there was a gear drive, and then the heavy duty, and I think we have a picture of it that had a big weight on it, which probably added to its pulling power. That's the gear drive.
There we go. The Super Brute. Yeah.
Look at that big cast weight. That's the new 62 catalog. So that's early 60s. And I think sometimes folks think they were all rubber band driven, but as you see there, that's 62. And no, it's got a geared motor, and all the wheels are, powered. And then it's got that heavy, weight put over it. So that's another thing for collectors to look for in these, that there's a number of different drive mechanisms, like the blue box flywheel that we know so well really is a product of the early 70s. It doesn't appear until like the U-boats of 72, 73. So like there's no flywheel on this. It's a much different drive. And then it differs too from that. We've got another picture, I think, of a Santa Fe with a different drive mechanism. So I think that at least like early on, as I was getting more serious into collecting, here you go without the big extra weight to it. But that shows you that early drive, which is not the flywheel that you might be accustomed to from blue boxes of the 70s forward, nor is it that really, really early rubber band. And some of these I wasn't aware of till I really got into looking at. I got pretty serious like in the early 90s on hobby history, and it's just kind of overtaken my interest in the hobby. And again, a lot of things you just take for granted, like, well, wasn't it always dual flywheel, whatever drive. It's like, oh, no, no, no. And I can remember my dad talking about rubber band drives, but then you start uncovering more things. Like this one, as you can see, is a later tooling with the molded on number boards. It's got the dual headlights and probably the single piece molded horns, but then it has this kind of different drive. And I don't know that I have an example of that drive. And that was in like the Jeep 30, the Jeep 7, basically the stuff of the 60s also included that in it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think you almost kind of take for granted either one way or the other that either they were always like this or they were extremely ancient. And as we've already seen so far, there's differences as it goes on. Because I mean, Athearn was, always progressing forward as they were, never satisfied, trying to keep adding to it. And as we've seen today, even with the F units that are available coming up from the October release, those are going to take advantage of the things that we take for granted now. And it's kind of funny when you think about it. It's almost like taking something from the car industry. We've all heard of resto mods. Well, they'll take a '69 Camaro or a '67 Mustang and they'll put a new LS1 or a new Cleveland engine a new Coyote engine in it and make it a power steering and stuff. So you had the looks of a classic vehicle, but in the inside, it's completely 21st technology.
And that
21st century technology.
I know for a lot of collectors, I get that both at Model Railroad News and HO Collector, whether it's, an old Tyco piece, an old Athearn piece. I had this as a kid. What drive can I put in it? And that's one of the great things about, these older Athearn F units is you can swap out and do a lot. I mean, that Athearn drive I recommend, as a swap in for any number of F units that were made over the years. But yeah, there's so many guys that I want to be able to run this or that was my first train set, even though my whole layout is like Genesis DCC sound. I still want to be able to bring out my Spirit of 76, whatever. So how can I make it run? And I think we may have even done that in the first HO Collector. I think we put maybe like Bowser's C430 drive in a Tyco Spirit of 76 430, because I'd had a lot of people saying, how do I make that go? So this, again, for F unit collectors, it's fun that you can just snap these on to about any drive and put a classic piece out there on, if you're doing an operating session.
Yeah, exactly. And the other good thing too is a lot of the parts, like the horns and the headlight covers and all that, they're still available. You can still get them at Athearn.com or through your dealer. It just amazes me at such a classic locomotive, we can still get parts for them. And it's great. I wanted to see what else you had in here because I think we had some more eye candy. We saw that one. This is a little bit more recent. This is probably, I'd say, from the 90s, isn't it?
Early 2000. No. Yes, that's the. Let's see if we can blow that up a little bit.
Yeah, let me see.
I think it's from a Model Railroad News in the 90s, I believe, and it was when you had the greatest little railroad in America or something was the tagline. But those were some of the early reintroductions of assembled models, or before the assembled models and train sets started coming back, which was another thing. As a kid, I never realized, because Athearn was always blue box and stuff that you put together. And right. I can remember my dad telling me, no, at one time you could buy Athearn assembled. And like, I wasn't aware, as a little kid of the about 1960-ish Lionel Athearn. The first assembled Athearn I saw was the stuff made for Cox in the early 70s, from like 71 to about 74. And it was, it always seemed amazing to see an assembled piece of Athearn. And this was just as that was starting to happen. You can see some of the logos and things, kind of that ends up being those early train sets that come back out with the Horizon era.
That's really neat. Yeah, it's amazing.
That's December of '96, and that's from Model Railroad.
'96, okay. Yeah, no, that is pretty neat, and that's about the time I had gotten through a lot of my growing up period and got back into the hobby, and that's probably where the F unit behind me that you can barely see is probably about the era that I got mine. So really cool. So I mean, just it shows you how long this particular locomotive has been in the Athearn lineup, and I'm sure just about everybody that's in the hobby probably has at least one.
Well, and the shorty passenger cars, the streamliners, were also globe models too. That's who first brings those out, and they are much different as well. They were flat stock initially.
Okay.
Yeah, there's the dome car, and it had like an antenna piece that went onto the roof. So these cars are ones we've known well for so many years. But if you start looking for them, there were flat stock versions of all the little 70-foot streamliner cars, and they were Globe and Athearn, boxed at the time. That's the instructions for them. And I didn't realize that for a number of years, but it's wild to see that, oh wow, those were flat stock at one time. And again, there's little tooling differences and detail differences to them. But there's so much to Athearn's history, because it goes back to, I think, Irv's O gauge is like 1943 when he was putting together freight car kits in his mother's kitchen or something, is the story, as the company got going. And then you get into HO by about 1950, and you've got Athearn stuff that's more like these globe kits where they're wood and metal cars before plastic hits. So there's almost, I consider it like a prehistory of Athearn before the plastic days, when there's the wood and metal freight car kits that I don't think of really as Athearn, but they were. So there's so much to Athearn's history that, again, is have you ever seen, this is another 50s piece while we're talking 50s stuff. Have you seen those?
I have not. Let me zoom in on those.
These were done, Athearn had these, and I think these also appear in like Revell or Aurora, or somebody else had them too. They're not exactly HO scale, and there's about 4 or 5 of these different kits. What's neat about them is, it looks like an Athearn blue box basically. And then there's things on the side that don't exist. Like there is no Athearn tank or rocket. You see these things over here. This one's got this cool speedboat. Now, some of these things exist as Revell or other kits, but these early Athearn things, and I need to do an HO collector piece on those kits at some point. I think it was Miniature Masterpiece is the sub name for them. But again, that always, when I've put those up at times or shown those like on our Facebook page for stuff, people are just like, that's not an Athearn model. Like, what is that? And it is, again, it's like, yeah, it looks like an Athearn model. And I think I found that in Springfield or Decatur with my dad in Illinois.
Really?
At a train show, probably 10 years ago. A guy had a handful of those, and I knew of them, and it was like, wow. I can't even remember what I paid for them. But again, there's so much to Athearn that it's such a great company to research, and the history is so much fun.
You sent one ad, which is fairly recent, at least in the grand scheme of things. I'll go ahead and put this up on the screen. This was in 2016, and there's a familiar paint scheme right there.
Yeah, there we go. So it has been Roundhouse before. Yeah, I think that's the introduction. When you first introduced Athearn Roundhouse as a brand name was June of 2016, and that is from Railroad Model Craftsman.
Okay.
And so that's when it was launched and Roundhouse was brought in. Because before then, I think Horizon had just ran the green boxed Roundhouse items, and mostly they were model die casting Roundhouse toolings with a little bit of odd crossover. But this new kind of rebranding that started folding in kind of a little bit of everything is only going on 5 years old, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. That's great. Well, these were really cool, and it's cool to like I said, take a walk down memory lane. I mean, this is I've got some pictures here. Let me grab those. And like I was saying, I got into this like a lot of you out there at a young age, and so I've got a couple. And honestly, I don't know if this is my brother's or my father's, but I went digging through the historical records of my model railroad past and came up with some interesting stuff. And you'll probably recognize some of these. I'll go ahead and share this picture. This first one here, I think, was my brother's, and we're talking probably 60s, 1960s, and Baltimore and Ohio. The painting was a little bit different back then. It wasn't quite as crisp as it is nowadays. We're a little spoiled that way. It has that pen line chassis that you were talking about earlier. And
So it's probably a pen line release. Then Penline had the Athearn F unit and the Athearn Jeep 7, and then for a number of their freight cars, they had the Mantua like 40-foot boxcar and other pieces. But in all of them, they made their own underframe. So like sitting in a box, you might pick it up and go, oh, that's the Mantua Tyco 40-foot boxcar. But then you flip it over, it's like, wait a minute, it's a different underframe. It says Penline. And same thing here. It's like, well, isn't that just an Athearn B&O F7? It's like, well, it is, but look at the metal trucks and things. And yeah, on the bottom, the trucks will say Penline. So they did their own mechanisms for those. And then Penline did later tool an F7, and it becomes Varney's F7 in the mid-60s, and then Lifelike's F7 as of 1970. It's easy to spot by the little stubby stirrup steps.
Okay, yeah.
And otherwise looks a lot like the Athearn, but that is Penline tooling that then
interesting.
The Kramer brothers acquired Varney, and then they were Lifelike all the time with like scenery material. Then in 70, Lifelike becomes its own line, but Penline for a number of years had both Athearn shells and then tooled their own. I'm working on I'm doing a Penline history book with one of the sons of, there were 3 guys that formed Penline after World War II. And I'm working with the son of one of those gentlemen and putting together a Penline history book. So it'll have all this.
That'd be interesting. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I see a couple of comments there. They're laughing, and I can see it too in the blow up. The B&O logo is a little bit off.
Yeah. The Capitol Dome's about to roll away there. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see what else I got. Now, I think the next one is a pure Athearn because the drivetrain looked a lot like that one from the ad. This is one that somehow, survived my childhood. I had an HO scale layout when I was a kid, and, kind of like Mr. Gomez, I'd do the whole, the bridges out thing. I mean, what kid didn't, but that somehow my dad's F7 lasted. There's some marks there of some futile attempts of detailing, I guess, as an 8-year-old. But, and it, the funny thing is the drivetrain is still there. The little insulator feet that hold the motor to the chassis they dry rotted away. They're barely there, but I bet you I can get this thing running again, which is great.
It would have been, that's because that look is Santa Fe repainting things, so that would have had to come out in the 70s, I think, from Athearn. In general, one of the things about collecting today is you guys do too much stuff. You bring out all these, and especially when you'll do one road name, but give me 2 or 3 different variations. It's like, I don't have the shelf space. This is too much. Whereas, back in the day, a classic Athearn Blue Box got about 4 road names, 1 road number, and that's it. And so this is kind of an unusual that there were some additions to the F unit roster, and I would guess would have come out in the 70s. I'd have to look, but in general, it was uncommon that for the most part, kind of once the 4 or 5 road names got done, that's it, no more. And then you had trouble always finding some like, well, I can find the B&O FP45s, but I want an Amtrak or Santa Fe. It's like, oh no, they're sold out. So there was a lot of that, but that's a classic piece there. Yeah.
And the funny thing was, I think it was because of this locomotive as a young modeler, why I chose Santa Fe to model, because you could get it. Nobody was really doing small East Coast railroads at the time. You pretty much had your choice of Union Pacific, Santa Fe. And so Santa Fe was easy to find. And I mean, nobody's going to argue that that's not a cool paint scheme. I like all Santa Fe paint schemes. And that probably did it. But as time went on, as I got older, I met somebody that taught me how to use an airbrush, and I upped my game.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And this was back this would have been a 90s era Athearn. And you remember, and I think Walther still carries them. Remember the Walther's detail kits for these?
I was about to say, I think you got the F unit dress up kit. Is what
Yeah, I mean,
the eyebrow grabs and the window pieces, and yeah, they came in a little clear, like jewel box, and had all the parts
that's
in it.
right.
Yeah, and yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
that is an A number one blue box F unit back in the day, because you've bought the
yeah.
Athearn kit or you bought the Walthers kit to dress it up. You've custom painted it. That's as good as it got. Yeah.
And to tell you how old it is, and the New Englanders out there will remember this name. It had AccuPaint and AccuCals,
Yep.
which they're long gone.
Oh, I
They're
remember.
no more. I probably still got some AccuCals somewhere in my decal bin. But yeah, this would have been my college days, so we're talking early '90s. Setting this up back in the day, hey, this guy knows how to detail stuff. That's kind of cool. Nowadays,
yeah, it's
I'm almost
interesting.
embarrassed to show it.
I'm forever digging through old back issues of Railroad Model Craftsman, Model Railroader, for research on things. And yeah, at times it's just like, oh my gosh, wow. Or when you see something like someone has, kit bashed and done all this work to make like an SD40 out of, the Athearn SDP 40 or something. It's like, why? There's a bunch of SD40s, but there wasn't then. And it's like, boy, that guy really knocked himself out for something that, there's 2 or 3 better ones you could go get. But yeah. It's fun. It's fun to see that stuff, because it gives you such this is state of the art, or this was the level of, we thought this was great. And now we look at, these Genesis units, and it makes me wonder. I know I had this discussion on, I think maybe it was on a Modeler's Life podcast with Lionel Strang in the last year, where I said, I can't imagine where we'll be in 10 or 20 years. I think somebody brought up dead rail technology or other things like, what do you think is going to change in the hobby? And again, it's hard to see or hard to figure, because we have such an acceptance for, man, this looks so good. Like that looked great.
Yep.
One of the things I equate it to is like when we had VHS, seeing it looked fine. Yet if I look at VHS now, it's like, is there something wrong with my eyes? How did anybody ever watch VHS? And then you got DVD and high def, that each time it moves up, yet at the time you never looked at a VHS movie or a Laserdisc movie or whatever and thought, it's just okay. It's like, no, this seems great. I don't know how it would get better. And it's like, oh yeah, this is Stone Age stuff. Wait till you see what comes around the bin next. So it's part of the fun of the hobby, is that there's always that ever changing. Yeah.
It's funny how you say that, because, just kind of coinciding with the dates of this, when this model was built, I saw something on YouTube, and it was a news broadcast from the early '90s. And you're looking at it, and like you said, it's, man, compared to what we have now, just with streaming video services, wow, that looks horrible. And
you don't question it. It's like, oh yeah, this is great. This is perfect. And it's like, oh wow, I couldn't do that. Or one of the things my dad says a lot that I think is great. He goes, I don't know how people got excited about the hobby. When he'll be at my place looking through some old like Walthers catalog or something. He goes, wow, there's like nothing available. It's like, and yet I was a big time hobbyist at this time. And it's like, I don't know what would have excited me now. It's like, it's just because it's changed so much.
It has. I mean, and kind of our priorities have shifted too. Where we would spend hours detailing our freight cars and our cabooses and locomotives and such. Now we can actually work on the layout, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
While digging through the archives, I found something I totally forgot, and check that out. That was a project never finished. Another Boston and Maine, but in the earlier maroon and gold Minuteman paint scheme, and never finished it. I just kind of happened to find it, and it's original, because check that out. It's still got the parts and the little envelope, and I mean, this box here. How many remember that box? I mean,
absolute classic. Now, if you go back the one picture, you can see this is from in the early '80s, the Jeep 7. Which, was called a Jeep 9 for a number of years. And the F unit, they got, the ads said beautiful Blombergs. And the retooled Blomberg trucks, which is on this one, would date it from like the early 80s or later, would be the tooling on that. Because, before you had the metal, see, it's got much better definition to the Blombergs. You can see the silver metal plate behind the plastic side frame. And as you go backwards, you get there's plastic for dummies and metal for powered trucks side frames, but they don't have the roller bearings. They've got like the slope and box journals. So different tooling on the trucks at the time. And those black foam pieces surrounding the model is an 80s or later thing. That remember if you go back into the 70s, it was a white piece of cardboard with holes in it that had like twist ties from a garbage bag type thing that would come up around, like basically where both the portholes are, the holes would come through the box, twist tie it in place, and that way, the model didn't fall out of the box when someone looked at it. So yeah, that would be early 80s with those trucks in that foam.
That's pretty cool. I had forgotten about this locomotive, but I vaguely remember I was probably 92, 93 when I picked these up somewhere out east in Massachusetts. And they were undecorated, of course, and of course any Boston and Maine modeler would know there was no steam generator that the Athearn had put on there. So you'd spend a lot of time with some sanding equipment and maybe some Led Zeppelin playing in the background to calm you down, and work on that. And it just kind of neat. It was kind of like a time capsule for me because, like I said, you've got that picture. I don't know how, as a young kid, just staring at that and imagining, where's the train going and what kind of layout can I build? And, the imagination factor was huge in that old artwork.
Isn't it? Yeah, that painting. I completely agree with you, James. That's one that as a little kid, I don't know how many times I sat just staring at that with the Santa Fe Streamliner there at the right. The UP train is waiting for the steam engine to get by. And of course, there were no, by the early 70s, when I was getting into trains as a little kid, there were no steam locomotives in Athearn's line. So there was always that, why is there a steam locomotive there? And that, again, I remember my dad saying, well, at one time Athearn did have a couple of steam locomotives. And, there were the 3, the 060, that little 042 Monster, and the 462 Pacifics. And I think that it vaguely might be the Pacific is what they're showing there on the box. But yeah, such a neat, that's an all-time classic. That's art. That would be beautiful to have like in your living room framed. I don't know what your wife would say to it, but I'm telling you, that's art. Yeah.
I'm going to agree with you. And I think she would too. She's pretty good about it. So I'll tell you, there's a lot of folks, I'm seeing some comments out there, and there's a lot of us that still run our Athearn stuff from the 70s onward. Like I was saying earlier, I have no doubt that hooking up my old MRC power pack to some rails, that locomotive would have no problem running whatsoever. And it's kind of reminds me, it's a very basic DC locomotive. It kind of reminds me of the old, Ford Chevy trucks with the old flathead engines. No computer, you just need fuel, air, and spark to get that thing going. And then you see these beautiful new trucks and cars that we have now. And with these new F units that we're coming out with, you really get the best of both worlds. Now, the shells that are going to be on these models, they're the same shells that we've had. They've just been fine-tuned and they've been, updated as we've gone along. So these are going to be just like the blue box F units that you remember back in the 70s and 80s. They will run just as good, if not better, than what you had in the 70s and 80s. But now you've got some new technology. You've got better electrical pickup. You've got LED lights. And if you really want to, you can put a DCC setup in it because it comes with a 21-pin setup on the board, which is becoming a standard now. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. It's kind of like when the big 3 kind of came out with their retro-looking muscle cars. The Camaro, the Mustang, and the Challenger. They looked the part of a 60s era muscle car. But we all know that any one of those would spank anything from the 60s. Yeah. And they don't have the same issues that the cars from the 60s would have. They have all that neat technology that keeps them running without a bunch of work on the weekends.
That is true. And now, you'll sell that new drive. There's going to be guys to put the DCC and have the LED lighting. Some of these guys that have like those gold Globe F units and stuff, I'll guarantee you that you'll sell some that the guy's going to take the shell off and go get a vintage shell to put on it again to take it out in an operating session or have this sleek 21st century drive in a real classic 50s shell. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And you kind of touched on this earlier. I mean, a lot of us have, like my the former Santa Fe unit that I showed you, and a lot of us have either maybe it was our first model locomotive, or there's some reason why it's special. Maybe a departed family member gave it to us for a holiday, or maybe it's some happy memories. And sure, you're not going to use it at the latest operations meet or anything like that, but you still want to keep that legacy going. And you've got a great comment there, is you can buy this new drivetrain, swap out the brand new body, but put on that other body. And the cool thing is everything that we've shown today will probably fit on that chassis.
Oh yeah, very little work. Yeah, probably a little bit in the back there around the coupler thing, but I would guess with just a little bit of effort. Yeah, and again to adapt other F units too, because the F unit's kind of universal. That again, there's so many different F units out there, and everybody kind of has a favorite or was there first. So I would suspicion that drive will end up under a quite a curious variety of shells.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty exciting. I'm pretty happy to see them come back out again. I mean, again, the F unit, it's just quintessential. I mean, it's just that locomotive that it's kind of like the 57 Chevy of its era as far as rails. I mean, it's just everything about it looked right. And a lot of people, even people that aren't into railroading, can usually identify that locomotive. They just identify that certain time, and it's a lot of great memories are coming through. We're getting a lot of great comments. I want to show you some other stuff too that we've got coming on the horizon. No pun intended. Because we couldn't just release these F units by themselves. And I mean, this is October. We've got Halloween coming up in about a week, and then after that we get into the holiday season. And of course, I mean, what do a lot of people, even people that aren't into the hobby, what do?
Set up a train around the tree. Oh yeah,
exactly. And so we wanted to release these F units with something a little extra too, so that way you could make your own train set. And maybe some of you guys out there, maybe you're younger and you've got some family members that have joined your family, and you're thinking, you know what, next year Junior is going to be just old enough to enjoy a train under the tree. So let me pull up the other releases that we've got, because we've got some freight cars that will go there perfectly with this F unit. And Tony, I know you're gonna still have some memories here, because these have all been offered before, originally in the blue box. So let me scroll down, and the first one, remember these, the HO chemical tank cars.
And those look so great. Again, this is, I think I said this with Matt and Janik on a show a few months back, that it amazes me when I see these done now, because again, if you got this as a blue box kit, all of that walkway around the dome would have just been the molded black plastic. Everything now is painted and so detailed. You've got printing on the ends that these models literally look at like, is this a new tooling? It's like, no, it is that car, but just done so well that they're just amazing looking. And yeah, those, I think there's 2 or 3 of those I already see that, I'm going to have examples of.
They're really cool. And like you said, they bring back memories. I had one of these tank cars about the time I joined a model railroad club in the early 90s. And exactly, I mean, as soon as you start talking, it brought back memories. I remember, I need one more car for my train for the display. So we ran to the hobby shop and I bought one of these freight cars, and it wasn't ready to run back then. And not only that, but you had to put the better couplers. You didn't have, they came with a horn hook couplers, which in the 90s operations, nobody was using those. So
we do that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, I got to switch out the couplers, and I gotta put those. And I remember those little wire pieces, putting them on. And of course, at that time I was all thumbs, and basically when I got mine done, it looked like it just come from a wreck. So these are definitely an improvement. And there's some really cool cars. They're based on a prototype that's an earlier prototype, and so the cars are really colorful.
Yeah, they're not just your typical like white or black tank cars for the most part. I like that the New Jersey zinc, the blue and white, that gray Ethel is pretty cool. And actually the orange hooker, a lot of people have done that over the years. But yeah, those are all awesome looking cars. And as you say, when they were in kit form, the wire, the ladders, all of that stuff was just raw plastic. So it's amazing how in the finished, assembled versions, all of that looks so much slicker. Again, it's like, wow, I didn't know that car could look that good.
Yeah, it really is amazing. I've seen these up close, and compared to what we had even 20 years ago. It's such an improvement. And, they're weighted correctly. They're ready to go. They really are literally just put them on the track and go. And so this would, and of course the prototype fits the time frame of the F units that we're showing.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
So you've got yourself a tank car, and a lot of kids are fascinated with tank cars. So that's a good choice there. And like you said earlier, the really cool colors. Coming up next, now these are pretty cool. And for those that don't know, if you're into modern freight trains, you're thinking to yourself, well, what's a 40-foot grain boxcar? No, because the covered hopper, believe it or not, is actually kind of a modern invention. Before, it was real common in the 50s into the early 60s even, where railroads would take their 40-foot boxcars and they'd convert them for grain haulage. And covered hoppers really didn't take over until mid to late 60s. So.
Right. Now, this one, I remember I just read an article on these recently because I was trying to dig up some information. And if I understand correctly, the article I was reading was in an old railroad model Craftsman, I think. And it talked about Union Pacific's cars. And I didn't realize, but these are essentially a rebuilt 40-foot boxcar that way back this would have had tall ladders, roof walk naturally, and it was sliding door. And for the height of grain hauling season, even after they had, covered hoppers, that they would still have to press boxcars into service. And what they did on some, they made a plug slider to where the other thing they did is they got used for wood, like lumber service, and they needed a wider opening, but they didn't want the wider opening in grain season. So with the plug slider, you could lock down the one side and then have the sliding door during grain season and, tack up the boards or put the stuff in the way to fill in the top with grain. And then they came up with, well, we'll just do both plugs. And then it's got that hatch above the one plug door that I guess is for the, the loading part. And it also said for inspection in the article I was reading, but these would have been rebuilt Union Pacific cars. So I don't know on the prototypes on the other. I'm looking up. I want to see more information, but I know for sure there's a couple of UP series that are pretty close for this. And this was, I think an early 70s Athearn release originally, and was one of the first quote unquote modernized cars with no roof walk. As a kid, I can remember this car was kind of an odd piece because everybody's boxcar had roof walks, tall brake,
Sure.
And that. And so this was an interesting car in that, wow, look, it's a modern car.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and it's something that bears repeating. A lot of folks forget that pre '68, you had the catwalk up here, and your brake wheel was up here, and they changed that to the more modern, like you said. A lot of railroads removed their roof walks and they lowered the brake wheel just for safety reasons. And that's pretty interesting that these were some of the first modern boxcars that were offered by Athearn. And once again, we've got a great lineup here. We've got pretty much all parts of the United States and Canada covered with these. We've got the Santa Fe and the mineral red, and the one of my favorites, the CB&Q and the Chinese red. That CP rail with the multi-mark makes an appearance again, so perfect with the CP rail F unit. And then who can forget the Great Northern? And speaking of modern, that was the Great Northern modern paint scheme too, the big sky blue.
Yeah, only a couple years. It's like 66 or 7 to in 70s be in. And then Sioux Line, classic grain hauler. In fact, Sioux Line, I've seen pictures of boxcars, in grain service, like deep in the 70s, where on branch lines and things. So that's definitely a cool car.
And then you were talking about the UP, and that's interesting tidbit. I knew they were used for grain service, but I didn't know they could switch back and forth like that. That's a pretty cool
I
thing.
think
So
the article the article I'm going to use for review or news thing on it in the magazine, and as the thing I understand is these all would have been single sliding door, and again they started using them for lumber service. So to get the forklift in with a pallet of stuff, they wanted a wider opening, but then it made it a mess to try to cover that up. They couldn't go with like a double sliding door or wider doors and then do grain service. So this was as they kind of kept moving. Well, what if we put a plug door and a sliding door? And then, well, let's do both plug doors and put a hatch for the grain up top. So I think this is kind of the last, most modern version of how can you haul grain in a boxcar.
yeah, no, that's and perfect size because most of us will run a train under the tree, so you don't want 86-foot boxcars or anything of that nature, or 89-foot flat cars. You want something that's manageable for the tighter radius, and so that's a perfect choice. Now, we also have the shorty tank cars that Janik and I talked about last week. But here's something that anybody that's probably under the age of 30 probably doesn't know what it is. And I'm being a little sarcastic, but let's see. Let me bring this back up. Back before the mid early 80s, you could not have a train without a caboose. And we've offered the old blue box Cupola Caboose, and it's available in all the lines that we talked about earlier. We've got the Santa Fe, the Southern Pacific, the CP Rail, Chicago Northwestern, of course, is Southern. If you take a look, and I'll zoom in on this a little bit. If you look at the Santa Fe, we've done something a little bit different. As far as I know, we've not done this before, but we've got the slogan on this caboose this time. You remember ever seeing the blue box ones like that, Tony?
No, that like intermodal or trailer silver SP caboose was done in the past. I think even maybe the blue box, but yeah, the safety slogan mineral red Santa Fe, I think is a first for Athearn's line. And this caboose, by the way, is its closest prototype, or it may be prototype, is a Santa Fe model. There's a book that I have that's plans for the modeler by Santa Fe, and it's this big oversized book with like the early E units, some of the last steam locomotives, and this caboose is in it. And then this caboose, those plans were reproduced either in Craftsman or Model Railroader, like maybe in the 40s. And then the plastic caboose comes out in 1957 from Athearn. So its prototype is one of the earlier Santa Fe steel cabooses. But, and then a lot of roads had similar. And you guys, of course, in the Ready to Run and now Roundhouse eras have done the capping over of windows. In fact, that Canadian Pacific with just the two windows showing, I've got prototype pictures that match up to that look. So it's fun how, again, that caboose can be made to look like a lot of things that it's maybe not exact for, but by capping over some of the windows with pieces of styrene, it looks really good. The Southern caboose is the one I think is really interesting here. I think it says Railway Express, and that's one I haven't dug that up yet, or any information on it. So maybe someone
on that so we can see.
Because I know the others are basically prototype, and I assume that there's something, or at least something suggestive of this caboose, but I don't know it. I'm not that into Southern stuff, but yeah, I'd be interested to know. Maybe
Railway Express Agency.
Yeah, so I was curious. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I have to talk to Janik on that, or maybe, like I said earlier, maybe one of our fans, Southern fans, would know. I know Janik works a lot. He spends hours. In fact, he was asking me some questions on something today, looking for information. So, like you were saying earlier, the Roundhouse, it might not be exactly prototype, but we're still going to try to get it as close as we can. We typically leave the genesis for the top of the line, distinctive, prototype specific model. But for somebody that's wanting something to either maybe kit bash or, just to run, we try to make these as accurate as possible, but they're going to have little differences here and there. And, there's some folks that they're fine with that.
And, it's another model that is so night and day, because as I remember it in the blue box era, I don't think any of these cabooses had clear window glass. And then the end pieces, the ladders were that stamped metal. So if you really start looking at these and think, oh, it's the same that it was, oh yeah, and even the early ready to roll, I have some of the earliest ready to roll stuff, and they didn't have windows yet in them. So again, These are kind of slowly upgraded even in the last 20 years. So it's a much different model than, it's not just an assembled version of the blue box, because there's a lot of pieces now, again, like the ladders, the ends, there's not the wire or the stamped metal pieces. That it's a much slicker looking overall piece, plus the windows. And then, as I say, the customizing things you do by capping over some of the side windows to present it more to match a prototype.
Right.
And yeah, those all match. Then that goes with between the F units, the tank cars, the grain box cars, these cabooses, you basically kind of have an a la carte, and put together train sets.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one of those things where if you're thinking ahead and you're thinking, next year, maybe the kids will appreciate that a little bit more. There's a lot of good quality sectional track out there, much better than what we had growing up. Remember the old brass track? That was really scary. But an Athearn actually does make a power pack. It's just a standard DC power pack. It's real inexpensive, and you can basically make your own train set. Back in the days of the 60s, 70s, 80s, even into the 90s. Remember, as a kid, you might have had a desire to have a certain railroad, but your parents were nice enough to say, "Hey, we got you the diesel set for Christmas, and it's the Union Pacific." And I don't care about the Union Pacific. I'm into the Canadian National. Well, now you've got a little bit more flexibility. If you want to run Southern Pacific, you can. If you want to run Southern, you can. So it's kind of nice how we've got something from each part of the country and Canada to make it your own. So, and the other thing too is a lot of those Roundhouse, all of them actually come with multiple road numbers. So it's real easy to make a train. You don't have to have just 4 cars. You can have even more than that. So
you mentioned road names and trying to determine on those things. I know you're a Boston and Maine fan, which would be a challenge to find. And as a kid, Gulfmobile in Ohio, which still is a favorite of mine, was always kind of tough to come up with. And I had a letter that came in for Model Railroad News that I wanted to ask you about. I think we talked about it a little bit before before we came on today, and it'll be in the December issue of the magazine, but we'll have the answer here. The SD40, I guess, -2s that were announced, and I had them in November's issue, like the Ferromex Mexican, the Genesee in Wyoming with a couple of different subsidiaries, that Oneida and Western. Some of these obscure or different roads that you don't see a lot. The person that wrote, Alan Matty, who's actually here he's a fellow Missourian in the Kansas City area. I actually bump into him from time to time at the hobby shops. He wrote me a letter and asked about how do you determine paint schemes? Because he's a big Kansas City Southern fan and would like to see like the solid white KCS and some of the others. And so seeing some of these other things come out, and I'm curious on that too, because when I see that a lot in an announcement, and I'll see like BN or UP or a big road name, and then a couple of odd ones, I always wonder, like, is it, well, we're going to make so many of these, and this is going to take up most of the production, but with what's left over, we need like, what's a smaller road that wouldn't have as much volume. How is that determined? Like, okay, I want to do a run of Jeep 35s. We need 4 road names, but they can't all be, Santa Fe, UP, whatever, or it's too much. Like, how is that product mix, or how is that in general? Can you share with us, how does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you're absolutely right. When we come out with some of the like the SD40-2s, we're going to come out with the ones that you could probably call the heavy hitters. Union Pacific's going to sell. You also know that Union Pacific with that specific locomotive had a variety of paint schemes, or they had a variety of railroads they picked up. So take, for example, a CNW, a former CNW unit will have slightly different details than a standard as ordered UP unit. So it gives you a little bit of variety within the road name. But you're always going to have those heavy hitters, and they always sell well for us. But every once in a while, you'll come upon something like a short line, or in this case, the Oneida and Western. And sometimes, we're trying to make sure that we can cover all the bases. We want to get enough produced so that we can bring them to market, if that makes sense. And every once in a while, we'll do a small line like that, and it'll surprise us. We live in an era where we're really kind of spoiled. We remember earlier we were talking, I kind of became a de facto Santa Fe fan because as a kid, that's all I could get. I had UP Santa Fe or maybe Canadian National if I was lucky. And now we're seeing more and more things. I remember as getting back into it in the 90s, I was just amazed to start seeing not only Boston and Maine, but Boston and Maine blue stuff, which was considered heresy back in the day. And now we're getting really great opportunities due to research, due to what a lot of folks send us as far as pictures and information, to do some of these smaller runs. And quite honestly, we'll do them kind of as an experiment, and we'll sometimes be surprised at how well they sell. And if that's the case, sometimes we'll redo them again.
But it is interesting because, again, it's easy to say, well, Santa Fe, Conrail, Union Pacific,
right.
That doesn't take rocket science to come up with that. But yes, some of these others, when I see the announcements, and that's why when I read Alan's letter, it's like, yeah, I wondered too. Like, really, Oneida and Western? I think I've seen some pictures, and that is really cool. But yeah, wow, what you've made 3 guys crazy out of their minds that finally they're going to have factory made. And I think he mentions in his letter, he goes, as a collector, those kind of oddball schemes are hard to pass. And I have the same. There can be a railroad that doesn't interest me at all, but they'll do some interesting one-of-a-kind paint scheme or some early this or that. And it's like, wow, I'm really not into that road, but that's too cool not to have. So I think that probably drives some of the sales for them as well.
The other thing, too, is we're seeing more guys do modeling from the prototype. In the past, it was pretty easy to, say, model the Burlington Northern. And by the 1980s, the Burlington Northern was pretty much homogenized. I mean, there wasn't much left over from the Northern Pacific, Great Northern, and SP&S and Burlington and such. So it was pretty easy to have Cascade Green locomotives, and that was it. We just modeled that line. But now, as we become more educated through the internet, through rail fanning, through seeing other guys' layouts online and such, we realize that all of those big Class 1 railroads have connections. And those connections are with short lines or Class 2s or what have you. So a lot of guys might see, the Oneida and Western and realize, hey, this has a connection. So I modeled this railroad and they have a connection with this railroad. So I'm gonna go ahead and get it. Case in point, coming from my neck of the woods, my beloved Boston and Maine is now Pan Am. And in the middle of New Hampshire, there's a little tiny railroad called the New England Southern, and they have one locomotive, and it's a little SW switcher, and it's painted UP colors, and that's it. And you might say, okay, why would a manufacturer come out with a one-off like that? Which sometimes it does happen. Well, if you are modeling Pan Am and you just happen to be modeling that neck of the woods, you're going to want a connection or an excuse to have a section of your layout that's industrial spurs, things of that nature. And so quite often we'll look into something like that. We'll see, hey, we're doing GP38-2s and we can do Santa Fe and Burlington Northern and all that. But hey, what else is out there? And of course, a lot of these locomotives, even the second generation diesels, they're going on to their third, fourth, maybe even fifth owners now. And it's always neat. Another thing that we've seen too, Tony, is not only just with collectors, but there's a whole host of younger guys that are getting into switching layouts. They like the operations aspect of it. And so they don't need the big, massive locomotives, mainline freight. They like the little switchers and the little 4-axles and the hand-me-down locomotives. And if they see something like, say, our warehouse or GP7 that we announced last month, that's got that cool factor.
Yes,
it's something I see every day. And so, yeah, they can put that on their layout and they can run it and they can show it. And in a year or so later, if something else comes out, they can switch it up. So that's a great question, and it's certainly something that you spend a lot of time on. Well, Tony, are you up for taking some questions?
Well, yes, certainly. Are we going to do any virtual rail fanning? Or are we just going to? Do you have a?
Let me see what I've got. I have got. Hey, perfect timing. And this time, looks like I've got a train. So let me go ahead and get this going here.
I wanted to mention, we were talking about the F units all the time. On the new Genesis stuff, if you go to modelrailroadnews.com, I've got a number of pages up on like prototype profiles and other things. And those Rio Grande, the Zephyr units, are up with some prototype information there. We've got a review coming in the future, but check out the magazine's website. That's modelrailroadnews.com. And you can see some, like when we have new products, we display them there. And then I do some extra things when I don't have space in the magazine or something's coming up later that I'll put out, some information online. So check it out. And we talked about the collector things. HO Collector Quarterly is another White River publication. It's 4 times a year and beginning its 5th year next year. And you can find all the White River things at shop.whiteriverproductions.com to find out more about it. And I think, has James disappeared on me? I was asking him about his weather because we've had nice fall weather here in Kansas City. Lots of the leaves changing, all that kind of good stuff. But I saw that Iowa had about a foot of snow, which is north of me about a couple hours. And I know James is in northern Illinois, and I'd wondered if he was having to deal with any bad weather. But he said no. I think it went more.
No, just power issues.
Yeah.
Oh, so no bad weather, just power issues.
South of Albuquerque, it looks like we are.
It's weird. We just had. I swear, I just heard thunder. We're here in central Illinois, and and that might have been why things got so dark so quickly. Let's see. Well, so I've got this up. I'm going to go ahead and make the screen a little bit bigger, and then we'll take some questions.
Isn't this such a cool thing too today? I love all this. My dad has discovered this recently, that he can watch YouTube on something with his TV, which I know I've shown him before. But anyway, he's said that to me a number of times recently. I said, "Oh, I can spend the whole night," and I've never turned on regular TV. I've sat watching like old Ford and Lincoln commercials from like the 70s or 80s, and I've watched like this virtual rail fan stuff. I can sit all evening just watching nothing but just jumping around YouTube, and it's just awesome stuff. But these virtual rail fan cameras they're tremendous.
It's great, especially where in some places the lockdown is more severe than others, and so if you're working on your layout or something, you can get some inspiration in real time. And there's shout out to Virtual Rail Fan. There's cameras all over the country.
Oh yeah,
where you can see all of this. And I see a Cub Scout Santa Fe down in there. That's pretty cool. I haven't been to Galesburg at all, I don't think, this year, so I've missed out on some of my Santa Fe and Burlington Northern stuff. It's been odd. Yeah, I rail fanned a lot on Saturdays. We used to go down to like Union Station in Kansas City, Santa Fe Junction, which is one of the virtual rail fan. In fact, you guys, I think, ran it last week or the week before. And yeah, Shane Mason and I would spend a lot of time doing that stuff on the weekends and hitting hobby shops. And again, with all the pandemic stuff, that it's few and far between to do a lot of that in-person stuff right now. So yeah, it's
different times.
Let's see. I'm gonna look at some questions here, some comments, and post them on here. Let's see. What can I dig up? Here's an interesting question. This is from Eric Lee, and he wants to know if Athearn did some runs of the Wisconsin Southern engines, and if we would do anything else like that in the works as far as the cars or anything of that nature. Off the top of my head, I don't know. And again, I mean, one of the kind of a follow-up answer to your question was about the paint schemes is there's just so much to do. And I jokingly say that, they keep Matt in a locked room and they feed him twice a day, and he comes back with really cool models. And then same with Janik. Janik spends so much time researching. And so there's so much, it's like information overload. Really is.
Oh, it is.
Trying to narrow it down to a few every month. It can be hard, but you know what? We do listen. So, email us, send us comments, and it's kind of like voting at that point. Let's see. So, Tony, tell us a little bit about your magazine. It's and where you get all of this information, because a lot of folks seem to be really interested in your all that information at your fingertips.
Well, for like HO Collector, as I say, I sometime in the 90s, and I forget now what really got me going, because it was before eBay. And once eBay hit, it was like crazy that suddenly, at your fingertips, you could find so many of these things. But I really got more and more interested in a lot of the trains that I didn't have as a kid, because growing up, Dad really frowned upon the train set type stuff, like the Tyco and that stuff was no. That I grew up with Athearn Blue Box and those kind of things. So we always had the catalogs for all the other things. So I would, knew of them and would see them places. But I kind of got on a kick of running down a lot of those models in and learning more about them. And as I say, that's really become, and that's one of the fun things about the hobby, is there's so many different aspects. You can be an operator, you can be into electronics, you can be into scenery, you can be a collector. And for me, the hobby's really turned into this kind of documenting history that I find it so exciting to put together how the toolings go from one company to another and how things change over the years. That is kind of my rivet counting is, oh, did you know this F unit used to have this on it, or it was also a pinline model, or it used to do this. And that's kind of become my interest, to where I collect catalogs, old magazines, naturally samples of the things. And I had websites, the hoscaletrains.com, which it's hosted by White River now, and I'm still in the process of updating all of those. But it basically is to try to document and put a lot of that stuff down, so enthusiasts can go and look and see, like, here's all the road names that were available, here's when it was first released, and that kind of information. But the history part is really overtaken as my main interest in the hobby, which is neat because it goes hand in hand then with the monthly model railroad news, because we're all about documenting what's coming out now and what's new. So I'm doing current in the monthly and then history in the quarterly. And then, of course, I also do the Collector Consist quarterly and Railroad Model Craftsman. And then Model Railroad News in the back has its little from the archive. And all of them get it. It amazes me because you always think something you're into that nobody else, no one else is this big a freak on late 70s Thunderbirds as you are. Then you meet somebody else and says, oh, yeah, I love those. It's like, oh, I didn't know anybody else like those. So I find that with almost every subject we cover in HO Collector or Collector Consist is when those letters come in and people say, I think the recent Railroad Model Craftsman, I talked about those flat stock Kurtzcraft PS1 boxcars and some other like better than average boxcars that were out back in the day that didn't always kind of take hold in the hobby. And we've had, tons of letters from people saying, yeah, my dad wouldn't buy those for me because he then would have to buy me, glues and knives and files. He said, you don't have all the tools to build those. So I'll get you the Varney or the Athearn or the whatever boxcar that you just need a screwdriver to put together and no glue. Right. So it's weird things you don't think of. And then other people talking about how much they liked them. So that history thing is such a fun connection. and seeing, because almost anything we cover ends up being, oh, that was the first boxcar I built, or that was my train set, in 1980, whatever, on my first Christmas having a train set. So it's always fun to read those kind of letters and see that, oh, that's neat. I'm glad that was, that's fun, because that's why you do it. It's the same for me, of opening a box going, oh, here's this thing I didn't realize they made, or I'm so glad to have one of these now. Yeah.
Yeah, and another thing too is, maybe like you kind of touched upon. You saw these things in your remember the old Sears wish book, or you saw them in the stores and you wished you could have them, and for whatever reason you couldn't, and now you can. You can kind of relive that childhood you didn't have. Speaking of which, I got a question here for you, directed to you, Tony. He wants to Skyrollo 54. Tony, do you know much about the history of the plastic 3D layouts? I think Marx, Lifelike, and Bachmann made them. I had one in 1970.
Yeah, the Lifelike's history was in styrofoam. In fact, I think when Walthers purchased their assets, there is still like Lifoam coolers and things. That company still exists separately. So those foam molded train bases that could be put together, and they were just styrofoam with like some mountain peaks and painted green, and you laid the brass track in them. And I think they made it so you could split it up and put another segment in. Those layout bases, Lifelike was the big one for that, and sold them maybe into the 80s. I don't remember Marx or Bachmann having ready-made layouts, but like Tyco had 2 or 3 in the early days as well. Theirs, I think, were more like for dealer display, but you also could buy like a little 4x6 sort of ready-made layout. But the most famous are probably those foam Lifelike pieces, which was, again, it came in a big box. Once you laid it down, you had a little bit of a scenic base, so it wasn't just a flat surface, and it had the grooves made for the track pieces to go in. So it's an intriguing idea. And again, collector-wise, hard to come up with, because a piece of styrofoam that's 50 years old that hasn't been, banged up, good luck. I don't have any in my collection, but yeah, it's on my list.
Nice. Tony, as far as if somebody is not familiar with the HO Collector, how could maybe they're curious and they're hearing about this for the first time, where can they go to sign up and get a subscription?
Shop.whiteriverproductions.com has all of our magazines and our books. White River has been around since the early 90s. It was started by Kevin and Nadine Udaly. Kevin's early work was the Missouri Pacific diesel locomotive book, and he did Santa Fe annuals. Today, White River does almost 20 of the Historical Society publications. So if you're a member of a historical society like Missouri Pacific's Eagle or the Milwaukee Railroader, that's a White River produced magazine for that society. And now I think our roster of regular non-historical society titles is 9, between when they first took on Model Railroad News, which is going on almost 10 years ago. We had Passenger Train Journal and Railroads Illustrated. And now, of course, we have Karsten's Railfan, Road Model Craftsman, O-Scale Trains and TRP, Trains and Railroads of the Past, Narrow Gauge Gazette are all White River. And you'll find all those at shop.whiteriver.com. On Facebook, you can search HO Collector and Model Railroad News, and those are active Facebook pages, as are their websites, and you'll find links there that, again, I post and keep updated with news and try to put some information out for those as well. And then my websites on hobby history, you'll find links at the bottom of a lot of the White River magazine pages, but it's ho-scaletrains.com will get you to the main page for all that stuff. And all of it's a work in progress. Not enough hours in the day, which you know how that is, James.
There's a lot. Yeah, we all do. I mean, there's a lot of stuff to archive. And speaking of archive, I've got another question for you from Randall. He says, "Hey Tony, what's coming up from the archive?"
The December issue that's going to press today, we've got train sets from a variety of people, and from the archive for December, I did. Lionel had a set of HO trains in 77 that had a copy of the Athearn Jeep 9, and they were called Great American Railroads. And the lure of this train set is it came with a map of the system. They had N&W, UP, and Southern, and each one came with a full map for the railroad. And I thought it was neat that the concept was to go beyond just that circle of track, where you'd have a map that you could look at the Union Pacific or the Norfolk and Western and go, oh, well, here's where I live and here's where the railroad is, that it kind of goes beyond it. So I have those covered in From the Archive that'll be out, in about 10 days to 2 weeks, beginning of November. That December issue's out. And then with each of the train sets we review, we do 6 train sets in December's issue. At the end of each of those, I do a little beyond the box sidebar where I'll say, like, okay, this was a CP rail train set, or this was nickel plate. Here's where you can find out more. So like if your dad reading this, here's how you can introduce nickel plate to your son through the Historical Society, or BNSF's website shows their map, to try to get more than just it's a circle of track and a train, but no, it's part of a whole transportation system, and here's what it does, which then adds to the whole concept of, prototype rail fanning to go with model trains. So I kind of took that cue from that. I show it in archive and then did it with each of the train sets.
That's cool. It's a great way that, White River kind of ties everything together. You've got your collector because you're kind of getting in touch with your kid, your inner kid, you're coming from your roots, but you're linking it all together to why we still do this as a hobby. Why do we model a certain railroad? And we've got access to those historical societies, so we can relive the days of our childhood and have fun with our older models. And then we can take our modeling to the next level by joining a historical society, learning about the prototype, and going further. And it's a great way how White River's just kind of completed that whole circle for the model railroad.
It always surprises me when I do, and you do occasionally run into people that are in the hobby and they're either only model trains or they're only prototype railroading. And I've never, it's like, really? Because to me, it's so, that the first, whenever you guys introduce or announce a model, I go looking for prototype pictures or how many of these did they own. That to me, it so goes hand in hand that there's no way I could do one without the other. Just be a model railroader or just be a rail fan. So that to me, I always am surprised when people, it's like, there's a whole other side to this that you ought to be doing too. And it's like, so yeah, it's a fun thing about our magazines that we have such a nice mix from, prototype and model sources of all types.
I've got a question from Ricky. He wants to know, Tony, have you been to the Model Train Museum in Hermann, Missouri?
I've seen pictures of it, and I think somebody wrote me with some things, but no, I've not been out to that one at all. No, but I know of it. It's on my list. I have so many, my list keeps getting longer of places that, and I have so many people say, well, when this is over or when this is behind us, I want to do this, I want to do that. And yeah, so but no, I've not been out to that one. I've been through Hermann on Amtrak, and actually, I've been through going back and forth. My family lives over in Central Illinois, but no, I haven't been there. I was going to ask you, James, have you been to Spring Creek in Nebraska yet?
I've not been to their store. I have visited them at some of the larger train shows, and really enjoy talking with Dave and the others there. They've got a great shop. At some point, I need to drive up there, though.
I was going to say that when you do that sometime, yeah, because I'm up, basically on 36, so you'd come across. But yeah, we got to do that because, man, that is such a great place. And I mean to plug a hobby shop, but when you were talking about going places, it's like, it hit me. I don't know if I've ever mentioned or seen you up there before. And a lot of the Athearn guys have gotten there for their events in the summer and whatnot, but that's amazing. This town of 700 people in southern Nebraska that has this train store that's just wow. But yeah.
Yeah, I've heard it's absolutely amazing. Matt's told me about it, and like I said, I got introduced to them a couple of years ago, and
they're great, Dave and Deb.
They're just great. Yeah, they carry everything you need for your model railroad empire, and then some. And great folks to do business with. Quick with answers. I mean, they're exactly what you need. And like you said, yeah, road trips are always fun, especially when you can get some prototype rail fanning in between. Let's see. The funny thing too, I was thinking while you were talking about the prototypes and stuff and how much crossover there was. When looking for these Athearn locomotives, I found some other artifacts from childhood. And you remember, I'm sure you remember AHM.
Oh, goodness, yeah.
I found my original Seaboard Coastline Spirit of 76 GP18.
It's amazing how, I guess at the time, Athearns and Bachmans were the closest to, doing the U-36. And then that poor paint scheme, Jeep 18, no. Tyco's big Alco 430 and 6, no. But that Jeep 18 is like 1974 from AHM. And, for its time, it had a scale width hood. It's not bad. It's made by Mahano in Yugoslavia, and they did a ton of road names that it was around for a long time. Yeah, AHM is a fun company because all the different things they imported. I think Vic Roseman in New York did his memories of Bernie Paul, who was the guy, he was the Irv Athearn of AHM, and talked about the company. And it's one that probably the names I get the most questions about are like Athearn, Tyco, and AHM, as far as tell me about this or can you answer that? And it's just because of the vast, they were around forever and they imported so much stuff. Yeah.
Dave Connor, I'll put this up because he brought back some more memories. He says that he has a lot of cocks made by Athearn equipment. I'd forgotten about cocks.
That was, it's LM Cox, and I forget what his first name actually is. And we did in one of the, and if you go to the shop.whiteriver.com, you can go to a page that's HO Collector, shows you all the covers of the back issues that are still in stock, and some are sold out, and it will tell you what articles are in each. And like I did an introduction to Cox a handful of years ago, and what, Cox was known for radio control like cars. They had the little flying airplanes that I think came on a handle. Wouldn't get away from it. Yeah, so they had that stuff. And then they got the bug to get into HO trains. For Christmas of 71, they come out with Athearn-made train sets, which again, at the time, Athearn, you couldn't buy assembled, nor could you buy train sets. So suddenly here was F units, Jeep 35s in these train sets with a loop of brass track and a little Cox power pack. The Athearn crossing gate comes back at that point as an accessory for Cox. And from 71 to 74, they sell this Athearn made line. And most of it is stock Athearn, but there are some collector things. Like there's a Penn Central black F unit. There's a couple of pieces that didn't exist in Athearn's line that are in the Cox line. And they're fun for box collecting. Like I've got an assembled, it's just a stock SP Jeep 35, but it's in a blue Cox package. So again, there's some of that. And like Atlas, when they had the Roco diesels in the mid 70s, they had train sets. You can find big yellow boxed Atlas sets with like the Athearn mechanical reefer, the gondola, that standard Cupola Caboose. Again, you couldn't find them ready to run at that time, but you could get in Atlas train sets those. And I think the unique pieces there is the Caboose. They didn't do road names. They did generics. Like it was red with just like a 3-digit number, like the Caboose would be 700 or something. And those are the odd pieces there. But again, Athearn ends up in so many different, just there's Lionel.
I was going to say,
Cox, Atlas. Athearn did exclusive run pieces for Walthers at times for a number of years. So once you start collecting, there's no end to it, because suddenly, it's like, well, do you have all of the Cox Athearn pieces? Oh no, right. But I probably need them. And there are different things. Like I think Cox had the little Hustler switch engine, and they had a gear version of it that Athearn didn't sell. That Athearn was still selling the rubber band driven at the time. So that was the only way you get a gear version of the Hustler in the early 70s.
Yeah, I mean it's amazing, and you reminded me of something else too. That Athearn did stuff for Lionel. Lionel got into HO, and so there was a lot of stuff. It was kind of like a private label type thing. They were doing a lot of private label stuff for what wasn't necessarily their bread and butter. But I see some comments out there. The Athearn blue box engines are like tanks. Yeah, they are. They run. They're simple, but they run really well. They're going to be totally different than a Genesis locomotive. Genesis locomotives are very delicate just because they've got all of that detail. They're very detail specific for what they're being modeled. But the modern day Roundhouse, based on the blue box Athearn, they're great if you've got a younger family member that has a passing interest in railroads. It's a great way to get them started. Say, get them the F unit. It's easy for the HO scale. It's easy for them to put it on the track, and it's a good price point. So you're not out of a lot of money, and you don't know, maybe 10, 15 years down the road, you're going to have your next prototype modeler in the family.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's how it works. Yeah.
I just saw, and it's funny that this comment came up. What about the Lionel Freedom Train? Now I have, I have that. I actually found it this afternoon. Was that an Athearn model?
No,
okay.
Yeah, Lionel's first run, they start out with an agreement with Rivarossi in Italy in 57, and they had production problems getting the stuff in. They moved to Athearn in like 58 or 9. The rectifier electric, the auto loader, the flat car with the boat, and the flat car with the airplane. A lot of that stuff was designed, I understand, for Lionel. And then Lionel purchases John English's hobby line tooling. That's where they get the FA and some of their, like a 40-foot boxcar and other things. And then they start producing their own product as of about 61 or 2. Lionel exits HO in 66, but they come back in 74 with, again, the leftovers of that John English hobby line. The FA comes back. They have a new kind of clone of the Athearn Jeep 9. And then they actually, the American Freedom Train is the SPGS4, and they contracted with Cater Bachmann, produced that for them. So there were a handful of things they did themselves. That little U-18B was molded in Canada and done in Mount Clemens, Michigan by Lionel. If you remember it, it was a real, as wide-bodied as the Athearn U-boats would have been of the time. This poor little U-18B was even chubbier. That it's really wide bodied, that was their own tooling. And then Cater they worked with Cater to get that GP30 that now is in the Bachmann. Bachmann inherited most of that stuff after about 79, the GS4, the GP30, those pieces moved over. But yeah, that Freedom Train was, again, that whole rash. If you grew up in the early 70s, the bicentennial stuff was just, that brought so many people into the hobby. I don't know how many people have told me that was their first train set, was some version of bicentennial. But yeah, the American Freedom Train, they did the 2 versions, the GS4 with the group of display cars. Then they had a shorter train and the FA had no prototype. I think it kind of looked like the Preamble Express paint applied to that FA, but yeah, there were 2 versions of it.
That's cool. There's another Cox question for you. This comes from Terry. He would love to hear you talk a little bit about the Cox lumber /4 set. It was offered in the Sears Christmas catalog. What do you know about that?
When Cox got their own line of stuff, they introduced what the concept's called Trainscapes, and they had an overhead crane system to pick up containers and a dock with a boat. And then the other Trainscapes was Big Pine Lumber that had a GP9 in yellow and brown. It had like a flat car with a lumber load. They had the little thing that could pick up. It almost looks like a forklift type deal. And then they had the whole lumber yard set with the log dumper, the little the sawdust burner. Those were such neat things because, again, it put together that whole concept of it's a toy, but here's everything that would kind of be in a container cargo dock set. Here's everything that would be in a lumber yard. I've not done the container thing, but one of the back issues of HO Collector, I do the whole Big Pine lumber and go through all the accessories and all the parts. And it's a fun, again, it was a good concept that kind of went beyond just a loop of track, that it tried to give you like, here's the whole side industry as well. But yeah, the Big Pine lumber was always a favorite of mine, and I forget, but in the last couple of years I did a whole feature. You'll find it in a back issue of HO Collector.
It was basically an early form of operations for
it was, yeah. It brought that idea in, and Walther's ends up getting a lot of that tooling. And I don't remember them getting the cargo stuff, but like Walthers had the lumber things in the 90s as well. So it was it had a good long life because it was a neat concept.
Yeah. So, speaking of bicentennials, we got a comment from coming in. He just picked up the Athearn Bicentennial SD45-2. Yeah, I got mine too.
Aren't those beautiful? I have one from
Oh
one of
man.
your first run of those. And
Okay.
I
Yeah.
don't know what was changed, but oh yeah, that's a stellar model.
I coming on board back in August. That was my first thing that I ordered because I remembered that as a kid, seeing it. Like you said, a lot of us growing up in the '70s, Bicentennial was everywhere, and I remember, watching I saw the Boston and Maine's Bicentennial when I was a kid. And you couldn't pick up a Sears catalog. It seemed like every train accessory and everything was something to do with the Bicentennial. It was such a big deal.
Oh yeah.
And I remember seeing that Santa Fe locomotive and thinking that is by far one of the best paint schemes ever to be adorned on a locomotive.
That was very neat because that big SD45-2 is such a long, big unit, and then to have
Right.
stripes down the side, and they still kind of incorporated the war bonnet up front. Yeah, those were sharp looking.
Yeah, it's hard to pass those up. It really is. And the '70s was a great time, and especially with what we've been talking about today. I mean, a lot of us in our 40s and 50s, we probably got our start in the '70s, and maybe if we were lucky enough, we picked up something from an older brother or a father, and we got into this great hobby. And who would have thought we'd be here today with the technology that we have, and it makes you wonder what it's going to be like in another.
Yeah, as I said
40
earlier, yeah, you have to wonder. Yeah. And and it's always the look of things. I can remember growing up as a kid in hobby shops being told, "Oh, model railroading is going to go away because nobody cares about diesels." With steam gone, because steam would have been gone about 10 years at this point. And I remember older guys like asking, "Oh, so kid, what do you like?" "Oh, I like F units or I like Jeeps." No, steam locomotives. What are you talking like this? Here's the problem with the hobby. This kid never saw a
Right.
locomotive, like the hobbies, just that's it. And it's like, well, that was like early 70s. And same with like
Yeah.
Amtrak, as private passenger trains went away. I can remember as a little kid, we were out somewhere, and I think we were with Dick Wallen and Dave Ingalls from Kallenbach, who just passed away in the last week or so, J. David Ingalls. And I remember one of those, it might have been Dave Ingalls, asked me, and again, I would have been like under 10 years old, what I thought of Amtrak. And I thought, oh, I think it's really neat, red, white, and blue, and all this stuff. And of course, it was, oh, you never saw Milwaukee Hiawatha's or Santa Fe Chiefs. Like, you may think, Amtrak is neat, but kid, you never saw passenger trains. And so,
Right.
and again, yeah, now and Amtrak, 50 years old. We've got 2 Amtrak books due next year for the 50th anniversary from White River. And again, who would have thought Amtrak would have made it 50 years? And yet now
Exactly. It
neat.
and another good thing about seeing some of these older models, it kind of lets us go back. I mean, like I was saying earlier, when I first walked into the railroad club back in the '90s with a blue dip F unit, the old guys were just, oh my gosh, that's heresy, that's blasphemy, that should be a Minuteman. Oh, what's wrong with you? And and we have another guy show up with his Conrail stuff. Oh, that should be a Reading unit, not a Conrail. And now look at it. I mean, Boston and Maine blue dips have been gone for well over 40 years, and Conrail is a fallen flag now. We never thought that would happen, in even Burlington Northern.
Exactly. And those are roads that you never felt had a lot of love. And yet now
Right.
I see, and I think I was talking with, maybe it was one of the owners at Ron's books about railroads. And I remember him saying, man, BN, Conrail, he said, these are topics that at one point I couldn't have given away a Conrail
Right.
book. And yet now people line up to get Conrail books. And so, yeah, it's interesting how things go in and out of favor like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's it's definitely a great time to be in the hobby because we can relive our childhood. And the funny thing about our memories is we don't remember the bad. We only remember the Christmas morning of getting up and seeing that, cool train set under the tree, or maybe your dad was got a 4x8 sheet of plywood and set it up. We don't remember the sectional brass track that would get dirty within 2 seconds, or the really cheap transformer, or those type of things. So now we can still have those memories, but with modern stuff in there. And just like we were talking about with the F units now, it's like a retro mod. It's still staying true to its original looks and some of the greatest paint schemes ever. But under the hood, it's all modern.
Yeah, that's one I will get that email a lot from somebody saying, I have this old, IHM or Tyco or whatever piece. How do I make it run? It's like, well, yeah, it never really did that. No, that's about what it always did. Like, no, you're not doing anything wrong. Yeah, that's what they did. That's what they were like. Yeah.
That GP18 I talked about earlier, the AHM. I mean, I remember feeling nostalgic in my 20s and putting it on the club layout, and it didn't run. I totally disassembled that whole locomotive, cleaned it up, put it on there, and and then you just take a random blue box Athearn, and even by comparison back then, just a random blue box Athearn just ran circles around the old AHM or Tyco. And
it's one of the best things I think about getting into the hobby now, if you're just starting out, between the roadbed track, the quality of the mechanisms, metal wheels, knuckle couplers. I mean, just this handful of things is night and day from, I tried to set that up and I got so frustrated with it and it kept going off the track and I gave up on it. I don't know how many people, as much as some of that stuff brought people into the hobby, how many of them then said, wow, this Tyco Power Pack's burning my hands. I can't run these trains, and gave up. But now, I mean, we've got such great quality that, again, anybody's basic train set is something that I don't feel like, well, yeah, but they may not stay with it long. Then now I think a lot of people we get in the hobby today stay with it because the quality is just, again, from the highest stuff like your Genesis to like the Roundhouse pieces, that there's none of the fooling or fiddling with it that may have once been kind of common, or, well, yeah, you can do that, but you got to know how to do this with track, or you got to understand that it's pretty simple now. And it's great because you can really get in and start having fun, then start tinkering with things later.
Yeah. We've had some comments in the past, why still offer the Roundhouse or even the Ready to Run. And one of the things that I always say is, one, we have to keep fostering ever younger modelers into our crowd, because we do have some young people that are in the hobby, but we can always use more. And the other thing too is a lot of guys, they might not have a home layout. They might have be part of a modular club, or, hey, there we go, we finally get some action on it. They might be part of a modular club, or maybe they take their layout to public places for exhibition. I'm going to be honest with you, as nice as those Genesis locomotives are, you got to be extremely careful with them. I mean, most of mine will just stay on my home layout. I'm not going to take them with me to a show or something like that. And it has nothing to do with the model, but everything to do with my my handling ability of things. A Roundhouse will hold up to the transportation a little bit easier than the Genesis will. Looks like somebody's going to be getting some new cars here pretty soon. So. Well, I think, Tony, we've had a great talk, and I appreciate you coming on board. I think the best thing for our fans to do out there is, if they haven't checked out your HO collector, they should do a couple of things. They should go to the website, maybe pick up a subscription, and then I think they also should go to their dealer and think about getting that legacy F7 with the new technology in it and those Roundhouse cars. Get those ordered up, and you'll have a really cool train set next Christmas.
Yeah, such fun stuff. Yeah, as I say, shop.whiteriverproductions.com will show you all our magazines and our books. On Facebook, look at Model Railroad News, our monthly news magazine, and with reviews of new products. And then HO Collector's got a Facebook page too. So yeah, check us out, and I answer questions. You'll find contact email on the website for me, and I do answer all that stuff. So yeah, please join in the fun. The collecting stuff is a lot of fun, and keeping up with the new products is exciting too.
It is a lot of fun. Tony, I want to thank you once again for coming on board today. I appreciate it. I know our fans appreciate it. And it's always cool to see where we've come from and where we're going. So once again, check out Tony's HO Collector. It is a great trip down memory lane, and you are a wealth of information. Thank you once again, sir, for coming on board.
I appreciate it, James. Thanks so much for having me. I hope to come back again.
Everybody else out there, I hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. Have a great week. Do some great modeling this coming weekend. Janik will be back next Tuesday, unless we got him on a really hot project. But we will be back next Tuesday. Until then, I want everybody to stay happy, stay healthy, and good night and high greens, everybody.